is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 518. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, not Luis Scott-Vargas. He could not make it on the show this week. He had a very, very busy week. So instead, we've got my go-to guy, Ryan Spain. Ryan, welcome back on the show.
Thanks so much, Marshall. Great to be back as always. Happy to give Luis a little time off if he needs it.
That's kind of part of the arrangement that him and I have. I just, he has so much stuff going on with his kid and his work and everything that I told him, look, man, I love having you on the show, and I want that to be a place where you're happy and and good. So I told him, if there's ever a week that you just think, you know what, it's just not going to fit in this week, just let me know and I'll take care of it. And I'm really, really lucky because, I have you. And like I said, you really are my go-to guy. I love having you back on the show. It reminds me of when we first started the show all those years ago. And also you just always, we work well together, right? I mean, there's a reason why the show did well in those early times. And I've just got a great stable of people to choose from as well. So I think it's actually kind of an opportunity, right? For to get some different voices in here. Mm-hmm, yeah. And as long as we keep the quality up, it's good,
And if you give Luis his release valves, he's unlikely to have the sign-off that you're so scared of.
Yeah, that he keeps threatening me with, you mean? It's like, yeah. I wouldn't be scared of it.
He's promised he won't. I believe, he's just trolling. But still, mental health is important, and making sure Luis can step away when he needs to is actually important for his longevity on the cast.
But the value train stops for no one. And even though I kind of obviously have a bit of a cold here, Luis isn't up to it. We're going to carry on. We've got a jam-packed show for you this week that we'll get to in a minute, with actually kind of 3 subtopics that we're going to be covering. The first things first, though, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all things magic related. While you're there, you can go to channelfireball.com/newsletter, and you can sign up for one of 3 newsletters. There's the standard limited kind of what's going on Luis's mind main newsletter. And then there's also the modern/pioneer newsletter from Matt Ness, and the Raging Levine, Eric Levine, covers the Commander newsletter. You can pick any or all or any whatever combination you want right there on the page. And I also want to remind you that you can sell your cards back to Channel Fireball. You get a 30% trade-in bonus. That's channelfireball.com/buylist to check out the prices, and you can get your cards sold there. Also, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. If you are a patron of the show, I just put up a special little extra something for you on there. I actually ended up doing a video of the deck that Luis and I drafted on episode 516. So that was the one where we got the Garrick and stuff. And I played the matches out, and I put a video of that up on the Patreon. So just another one of the little bonuses that you get for being a patron and helping to support the show. We do appreciate each and every one of you. Let's get into the Crack-A-Pack here. Ryan, are you going to be able to take yourself out of arena mode? Like you do, your stream is effectively exclusively arena, right? And, I don't see you down at the local shops all that often. Are you just arena drafter guy?
I am. Maybe it's breaking me in some way, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how we experience things on the battlefield, and that informs our pick adjustments. And I think, maybe my sense of what might wheel is super out of whack, but I think my sense of what is good in the format is as solid as anybody's.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, Ryan's over at Going Optimal. You'll find links to his stream, and we'll talk about it in a little bit as well in the show notes here as well. But, fully endorsed limited resources, what do you want to call it? Like a companion, right? Like,
companion stream, companion content.
Yeah, exactly.
But to be honest, I'll be honest with you. I have not drafted this in paper at all. I haven't played with an Eldraine card in paper.
Crazy.
I didn't go to the pre-release, and I haven't gone to a draft yet. So that's
what a world. What a world we live in. Yeah, that's cool though, right? Like, I mean, like you can just you've probably drafted this format, a billion times. So it's cool. All right, first card by the way is True Love's Kiss. That's the 2/white disenchant that you draw a card. No, we're not going to.
Nah, not first.
Witching Well. This is a good one. I like that card. You like Witching Well?
I like it a lot. Here's my arena experience. It wheels a lot on arena, and In fact, I did a draft today on stream in which we saw, I think, 8 witching wells total. It was just like every pack had one. It was one of those things. Yeah. But that was just coincidence. But
what if you just played like 10 of them in a deck? What would happen?
Well, I actually, over the course, I ended up with 1 in the deck, but total passed 3 animating fairies. And I really wished we had the 5 witching well, 3 animating fairy deck. That would have been sweet. But we made some good picks.
Oh, yeah. That's good. That's good.
I took like bacon to a pie over animating fairy, that kind of thing.
You do what you got to do there. Embereth Paladin is next. That's the 4-mana 4/1 haster with Adamant. It gets a counter.
No, we're not taking that here, but I find that to be a 23rd type card in a heavy red deck.
Yeah,
that's aggro.
Where are you at on Foreboding Fruit?
I like it a lot. I am early on. I was very much drafting black green pretty heavily. Now I find it to be just an okay color pair. But when you're in the black green food deck, it's quite good. And it's in a nice space. I like the tension on the card in that as a design where you're often being asked, well, do you just want to not get the food and take 2, or do you want to wait and try and get that adamant for the food? But it's been, the format is shaken out a bit to have a nice mix of aggro and control. And so it's bad if you're under a bum rush, but if you are going long against another control deck, it's the kind of thing that wins you games.
Yeah, I like it. It feels like a slightly older school designed card because it does have that tension that you mentioned, as well as the fact that you can target yourself or your opponent to mill or kill them if they're down to, few cards in their library or really low life total. I like that too.
Yeah, I had a situation once where it was attacked down, like Oppo made a weird attack and we were all confused on stream, like, what are they doing? And I got down to 4. They just threw away a bunch of creatures and they went, foreboding fruit. That was it.
Crazy.
Like, we understand now. Okay. They had 4 to the face.
Yeah. And foreboding fruit burnout. I like it. Spore Cap Spider. Yeah, sure. Whatever. Forever Young. This is a card that perhaps is a little bit disproportionately powerful on Arena.
Definitely. This is where I have to be aware of my Arena brain, where because of the nature of the bots, where you're not drafting against humans, and the major consequence is that 7/8 of the cards drafted are not part of the play meta, and therefore anything that's under drafted is overrepresented in your matches. And the mill deck is in that space now on Arena. In fact, going back to this deck I drafted today, we only found 2 Secret Keepers. We were still a mill deck, but we didn't have a lot of the Secret Keepers. I ended up going 4 and 3, and all 7 of my opponents had a Secret Keeper or more in their deck.
Okay, that's just ridiculous.
7 Secret Keeper mirror matches. And it hasn't been that bad of late. That hasn't been my normal experience of late. It was extremely off today, but it's more argument for human drafting. But anyway, a little transgression aside there to get to the point of the fact that the mill is easier to get on Arena makes Forever Young one of the most important Arena cards because it's defense against mill. In normal drafts, if you're drafting and playing in pod, it's a good card, but on Arena, I will take it highly to make sure I get one. Although also on Arena, you can start to learn what's going to wheel consistently and what isn't. So I don't think we want to take it. We would, if we end up in black, we would keep it in mind as something we want to try and wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Rosethorn Acolyte is next. That's the little mana creature. I actually thought this card was going to be quite strong in the format, but it's dropped down a fair bit for me. It's just fine.
It's just okay, right? The trouble is how much value are you getting from going from 3 to 5? And also, how much value are you getting from splashing? Most people don't, like, a third color does not seem particularly advisable in this format, barring some very specific circumstances. So just the value of having that green fix any color ability is lessened, I think, in
Agreed. Knight of the Keep, that's the 3-mana 3/2. No. Wicked Guardian, fine. This moves us to the uncommons. Or actually, I lied. We have one more common, but it's a foil. It's Flutter Fox.
I like the Fox, but we're not taking it here.
No, what would we take of the commons? Witching Well? Foreboding Fruit? Roast or acolyte? What do we like here?
Fruit or well?
Yeah,
I guess I would
take well. I guess.
Yeah, I'd probably just take the well. Sadly.
Okay, we're hoping for something better here. So the first one out, no, it's Inquisitive Puppet, the stupid Pinocchio card. You know, it's really funny because I see this card and I think, okay, I see what you did there, right? Like it became a real boy or whatever. And that's cute. That's exactly the same thing that I thought about Ginger Brute when I first saw it. And I thought this is like a throwaway, but it's funny, right? Like, or it works like,
the flavor is great.
Right. And it turns out Ginger Brute's a card that I've played, you know, way, way more than I thought I actually would in the format. Not that I think it's amazing by any stretch. I just think it's playable, where I had it in the same category as this Inquisitive Puppet, which is not a card I want in my deck.
Yeah, I had Ginger Brute as kind of a build around, and it's eclipsed that. You know, you can play it in more decks than I thought you could. Yeah. But I hear you. There's like Inquisitive Puppet is classic. All right, got to win now. You know, I'm not losing to an Inquisitive Puppet. Dang it.
Dang right. That's right. In fact, that might even make it. I have a list going for the Sunset Show. I decided finally just to make a separate document where if I come up with that card, you know, then I go, you know, got to make sure I put that list in. So yeah.
Right.
Anyway, Inquisitive Puppet might win that award. Ooh, I like this next one though. Oakham Adversary. That's the 3 and a green 2/3 death touch. Whenever it deals damage to a player, draw a card. And you can get it cheaper if your opponent controls a green creature by 2. Awesome card. That card's sweet.
It really is. I rarely take advantage of the discount in a meaningful way. I mean, sometimes you do pay less, but usually that happens at a point in the game where you have the spare mana anyway. Although sometimes you get a lucky turn 5 where they've played a green thing and you draw this off the top and manage to 2 spell because it's only 2. But it's very unusual for you to like get this played on turn 2 or anything like that. I've done it once. I was on the draw and my opponent did a trail of breadcrumbs on 2. And I was like, sweet, I got a turn 2 play too. Yes. So it happens, but it's very rare. The bottom line, though, is it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of attacker. Are you giving me a trade or are you giving me a card? And if you can support it with pump spells, removal, etc., it is really oppressive if it gets going.
Yeah, this is a good spot to note here as well that like the 1 extra toughness is a game changer for Oakham Adversary, right? Like if it was a 2/2 and you know, your opponent played a 2 mana 2/2 in green and you got to play it for cheap, but it just ultimately traded off. That would be so much worse than what it actually does. Because if they play a 2/2 or another 2/3 and you can just send it into it and they are just looking at it like crap. Like I don't even want to take one hit from this thing, but they can't start throwing actual cards under it right away. And it puts them in a super tough position where if it had 2 toughness and it traded off for, you know, 40% more of the creatures in the format, it would be so much worse than it actually is. Yeah. It's just it's a total game changer that it has 3 toughness, which you normally would think, whatever, you know, 2 toughness, 3 toughness. Next is Thunderous Snapper, which is the 4/4 Turtle Hydra. It's the blue-green hybrid. So whenever you cast a spell with a converted mana cost 5 or greater, you draw a card, and it's a 4/4 for 4.
I mean, if you're in those colors or monocolored in one of those colors, you're happy with a 4/4 for 4 with some upside, but it's not really common and limited to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna stack my deck with 5s and 6s to take advantage of this 4/4. You know, it's you got to think of that more as gravy, or you're gonna overload your deck with too much expense.
Right. And that's why it's kind of has a cap on how good it actually is. Yeah. Our rare is Dance of the Mans. This is the blue-white X sorcery. Return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment cards, each with converted mana cost X or less, from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, in other words, if you've invested a full 8 mana, those permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to their other types.
Hard to make this work in limited, but I've heard of people doing it. I don't, if you're on the Pro Tour or day 2 of a GP here or something, you're going to not take the rare. I just take the adversary. But if you are in it for the fun, in it to make something clever and cool work, you can absolutely take this and focus your picks on eggs and scalding cauldrons and that kind of thing, and actually have this as your end game plan. but it's not advisable as a high win percentage play.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Again, I think you said it well. It can do its thing. It is not impossible. This isn't a complete pipe dream, but the setup cost for it's actually really high. It's even higher than it looks. Not only do you need the cards to be able to bring back, call it 2 of them in your yard, or maybe even 3, kind of where you want to be. It also doesn't go as well with the main theme of this color pair as you'd think. Yeah, it is about artifacts and enchantments, and that's kind of the name of the game for this, but it actually ends up playing out like a Flyers deck, right? Like its signature uncommon is Shine Chaser, and that gives you, a decent, I'm not even that big of a fan of Shine Chaser, honestly, but it gives you a decent flyer for a decent price that lets you beat down. And Dance of the Mans is very much like let's slow everything down. Let's set up this sort of very specific set of circumstances where I've cast these cards, they've gone to the graveyard, and I can get them back for a lot of mana. It goes in the face of that. Normally, when you play this, you're trapping things in towers, you're attacking in the air, you're kind of getting them dead, and Dance of the Man sort of is awkward in that scenario where you don't necessarily want to do I have a bunch of golden eggs and things like that, the value play around it. Yeah. That said, I have seen it do it. I mean, I've seen it in blue-black where people played it. I've seen it is not impossible to make Dance of the Man's work, but I'm with you. I would take Oakham Adversary for sure.
And you can certainly splash it because what you really want to focus on is those eggs, and you can actually use the egg to get the mana you need and also get the egg in the graveyard so that you can actually get it back with the Mance. But I'm only interested I really want self-sacrificing artifacts. And that means kind of Witching Well, Scalding Cauldron. And eggs, right?
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything else, but like that's what you got to focus on if you go for it. But I'm just taking the adversary here and seeing what comes next.
Yeah, same. Okay, so that's it for the Crack-A-Pack. Let's move on to the first of our 3 topics. So what we're going to be talking about here, first off, we're going to be talking about a little bit of an update and a touch on ROTy, which is something that is sort of key to, anybody who's been listening to the show for any amount of time knows what that means. But we'll touch on it again, and also just kind of brush up on it based on some stuff we've seen in the community that we wanted to address. Also, the state of the game for Arena. Ryan worked on the Arena team before, and he plays Arena now on his stream every day, and is plugged into the whole Arena ecosystem. So we're going to get kind of updates on that. And then the last time that we had Ryan on a few months ago, we had so many questions for Ryan that we weren't actually able to get through all of them. So I've gone back and grabbed some of them. This still actually won't be all of them, unfortunately. But that's it, it's a double-edged sword, right? We have an awesome community around this podcast. And when I say, hey, I'm going to have Ryan on, they bring the heat with a whole bunch of awesome questions, but there's only so much time on an episode. So we're going to go back and answer a few more of those questions, just, trying to get through those. Right. So let's start off with the ROTy thing. What have you been seeing?
Well, I suggested we talk about this today, Marsh, because it's come up on stream a few times where I chide viewers who are being results oriented, or it comes up as a topic, and sometimes I get the pushback of, how are we supposed to learn anything if we don't care about results? Or how can it? Surely results matter sometimes, right?
I've heard this argument many times over the years, in fact.
Right, and I want to really nail down the difference between the negative that is results-oriented thinking as a term versus the idea of being able to learn from results. Those are not mutually exclusive ideas. And so I just wanted to really nail that down and isolate the difference between the negative of results-oriented thinking and the positive of learning from your experiences. And it is possible to marry those two into a nice whole that allows you to improve at the game and make better decisions. But I think we should start with a review of just what the heck we're talking about with ROTy and what does that mean? Well, results-oriented thinking, it really came from our poker discussions. And so ROTy, results-oriented thinking, is where that came from. And the negative of it, which we'll get into in a second, became, when we would catch people being results-oriented at poker, even emotionally or decision-wise, we developed the term "don't be ROTy," or the phrase "don't be ROTy," which is basically the act of engaging in results-oriented thinking. So what does that mean? Let's give you some simple examples. We'll start with poker. We played a lot of Texas Hold'em, where you get 2 cards to start, and then a shared board of 5 cards comes after some betting rounds. But let's say I have a queen, 2 queens, and Marshall has 2 kings. It's hidden information. We don't know what the other has, but they're both super strong hands. And we bet back and forth before any of the shared cards come out, and we get all in. All of our chips are in the middle. And we flip it up, and king is way ahead of queens, like 90%, 90-10. So at this point in time, Marshall is 90% to win this hand, and I'm 10% to win this hand. Now we roll out the board, and we add 5 cards to it, and boom, I spike a queen. Now I've got 3 queens, and Marshall has 2 kings, and I win the hand. The results-oriented response is, dang it, I shouldn't have gone all in. Or, I shouldn't have bet the way I did. When statistically, it was absolutely correct for both players to make those decisions. They both have hands that are strong enough to lead to an all-in situation. But the problem is when you decide that based on the result and the result only, that you made a mistake, that you should have done something differently to avoid this loss. And saying don't be ROTty is saying, hey, don't have that mindset. You need to be thinking about the decision-making process, not exactly how it played out from there. So that's one example. Even simpler example, I offer you a 50-50 wager on a 6-sided die throw. So we're going to roll a 6-sided die, but you get to choose. You get 1 through 4 or 5 and 6, your choice. Now, anybody thinking about it is going to choose 1 through 4. That's more options. That's 4 options to 2 options. But say Marsh chooses 1 through 4, and then we do it 3 times in a row, and it goes 5, 5, 6. And Marshall concludes, I should have bet on 5 and 6, I guess, right? No, you shouldn't have. That's result-oriented thinking. That's revising your process to retrofit to the result you had. And from the very beginnings of the show, we pressed on avoiding that in Magic, but it's much harder in Magic. These poker examples and a die example, it's very simple. Very, very, you can do the math on a napkin in this case, but Magic is filled with much more complexity. I think the kind of classic example from Magic would be you've taught a friend to play limited, and they understand the 23-17 split, and they're doing it not because they understand it fully on a statistical level, but because they understand that you're a better player and told them this is how you should do it. They play 3 games and they flood out in each one. And so they say, you know what, I'm going to go to 16 lands. That is results-oriented thinking, and that's what we push against on limited resources and on my stream. And so I just wanted to lay that out. Marshall, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, that's I think a really good example. Both of them. The idea here, right, is that's our baseline. That's what we mean when we say results oriented, right? We don't mean just the English words right next to each other that happen to, because if you do that, you can take those words and you can apply them literally. And the problem is that what we're describing is a concept. It's a strategic concept. It's something that we've made up as human beings in our heads. And that isn't the same thing as the exact English words. You know, one of the best examples of this happening also within the realm of Magic is strictly better, right? Strictly better is a term used in R&D at some point to denote a card that fully made redundant, a prior card. It obsoleted something before it, where under all normal circumstances, you would play the new version of the card over the old one. For example, if they had printed Lightning Bolt after Shock, they would have said it's strictly better than Shock, right? Yet
same cost, same speed.
Right, exactly. Everything the same, but you just get more, right, of whatever. And but people always have a really hard time with that because they think of the English words strictly better, and they say, but it's not. Because in Magic, you can always come up with an exception, right? Almost no matter what. Like there's probably a card that says, prevent the next thing unless it's 3 or more or something, right? And you're like, well, see, Shock gets around that. It's actually bad enough to not get binged by this card that nobody ever plays or whatever.
The classic annoying counter argument is Mindslaver. Mm-hmm. If I get Mindslavered, I'll wish I had Shock. Right?
Exactly. There you go. And, you know, and again, this is the problem with this is that this is people missing the point, right? That strictly better, you don't need to take the two English words. You can call it whatever you want. It's used to describe a concept in game design for R&D of saying in a shorthand way that we've designed a card. Yes, that we obsolete something else. Is that something that we want to do or that we're comfortable with? When it comes to results-oriented thinking, it's similar. We have applied this name to it that we got, as Ryan said, from poker, you know, to on a concept. But it isn't strictly that. Or if you wanted to interpret the wording, you could say, well, what about this? What about that? And, you know, you and I have heard those examples a lot over the years.
Here's one way to think about it. Like we're saying inherently and universally when it comes to gaming statistics and stuff, results-oriented thinking is bad. But thinking about results is not inherently bad. And that's where it gets tricky. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about this today. People hear the term results-oriented thinking as a bad thing and push back because thinking about results can't inherently be a bad thing. So why would you suggest not thinking about that, LR? And I wanted to cover that today.
Okay.
So this comes to when we decide something about Magic, and Magic is just such a more complicated game. These examples I gave are statistically easy to break down. You know, they're just matters of simple math. Something like, I thought Ginger Brute was this good, and now, after seeing a bunch of results, I think Ginger Brute is this good. How is
Q, you know, finger in the air guy?
Wait a second. Yeah. You said results-oriented thinking is bad. How can you change, you know, how does one properly change their opinion about things in Magic if LR and other pros and experts are saying, don't be results-oriented about it? What else do you have to work with but results, right? And that's a great question and a great point. And it gets away from it. So yes, the thing to remember is results-oriented thinking is a mindset that we warn against, but it doesn't preclude people from thinking about results to improve their awareness, understanding, and feel for a format. So I thought Ginger Brute would be a good poster child for the discussion, since I saw its potential as a build around a bit, but I think we both came to realize that it's more playable than we thought. But how did we do that if we didn't just, because it's not like we've had it's not like we've played a million Ginger Brutes,
right,
and have some beautiful statistical understanding of exactly how much your win percentage goes up or down by including one in your deck.
I don't have a spreadsheet. I don't have a model, you know.
we only ultimately have the results we've experienced and that we share with others. I mean, part of, I think, the benefit of a podcast like this, the benefit of talking with your friends, the benefit of me talking with viewers on a stream, is that we're all trying to understand a big picture that we only have a small window into. And so by talking with each other, we can get extra results to think about that we didn't experience ourselves, and use that to create a picture that helps us adjust our opinions without being results oriented. And I think the main thing I want to get across with how to approach this in a positive way is that if you change your opinion on the power level, if you want to adjust based on results, it's not really just like the results that this led to a win or a loss, or this led to a blowout or not a blowout in this one play. It's, what did I learn from this result that actually changes my fundamental opinion about how I arrived at the power level on this card? So let's go back to first blush look at Ginger Brute. It looks like effectively a 1/1 haste that has activated unblockability.
Yep.
And
can be sacked for life.
Yeah. And that even I think that's the thing that we have to remember about it too. I think on the surface, it's easy to just think of it as, is a 1/1 haste that mostly can't be blocked worth it? And our history of play and experience says that it's not. That against control, they're going to find a way to control the game before plunking away with 1 damage at a time matters. That if you're aggro, you're going to do more damage over time if you just play a 2/2 for 2 and swing with that, as opposed to an unblockable 1. You know, there's all these things working against it conceptually as a card we want to play against control, against aggro, in aggro. Like basically, there's all these things working against it in our experience. So what happens along the way for us to change our opinion on that? And I think to be able to say that you've adjusted your evaluation of something without it being an example of results-oriented thinking is that you need to be able to explain what has changed. What new information did you get about the environment, about the other cards in it? Did you see something that's like, oh, I didn't really consider that synergy? For example, oh, it's really like, we don't recommend a heavy aura deck or whatever, but if you do end up in an all that glitters deck, suddenly basically anything that allows you to increase its power turns it from this minor threat into a major threat.
Yep.
And one of the first things I realized was that there's just more ways to do that than I was fully aware of in the set. In particular, I like the Twin Veil Treefolk, the Oaken Boon side of that card.
Yep.
Because it's not even like an aura. All that glitters is risky for all the reasons we tell people auras are risky. Oaken Boon, if you do it while shields are down, is nice and safe, and you still get another card off of it, for example. The nature of the format, its speed, the availability of inevitability. Like maybe you don't always have great inevitability in your control deck, and you actually need to fall back on something like a Ginger Brute because at least it largely goes unblocked, for example. I don't know, what are some things you learned about the environment and about Ginger Brute that changed your opinion on it?
Yeah, well, I learned that if it gets 2 power or above, it's quite strong, right? Also, it's an artifact, which sometimes matters, sometimes doesn't. In fact, it can even be a liability, but sometimes it matters. Also, the fact that it's food matters a little more often than you thought. Like, for example, if you're in the food deck and you draw it late in the game where, that 1 damage really isn't going to add up, but you can use the food to generate some value some other way, that can be relevant. And then also just the fact that it is food in the sense that you can sacrifice it to gain the 3 life at some point as well is weird and not, why you would play the card. But hey, that's a relevant tacked on ability. That is not 0, right? Yeah. And, each of these little tiny things added up to, so if I put this Rosethorn Halberd on it, it's actually pretty strong and kind of has to be dealt with. Going down the line to like, hey, you're trying to mill me out. And you're playing a bunch of these stupid 04, Merfolk Secret Keepers and stuff like that. And you don't have anything with haste in your entire deck, right? So all I need to do is get an equipment or a +1/+1 counter or something on this thing. And it's a very real clock that you're going to have to deal with for the rest of the game. And, if this card gets in for 6, 7, 8 damage, that actually is relevant. So these are all things that I actually saw happen, right, in games that I did myself or that somebody did against me. And I kind of took it as a data point, right? Where I'm like, oh, mill you with my Secret Keeper, play my Secret Keeper. And they're like, Ginger Brute. And I'm like, oh, no big deal. And then they start hitting me with it. And then all of a sudden they're like Halberd and they're like, hit you for 3. And I'm like, oh, like I actually have to deal with this card. Like I have to use a spell on this card, right? Yeah. That was like a very low pick for them. And it's just their kind of junky little 1-drop or whatever. And, you see that happen enough times and you go, oh, maybe this does actually have a place in this format. Also it's a non-human. So if you have that thing going on, there's a whole bunch of little tiny things that add up to make it, a decent card.
Yeah, and a big one for me was artifact synergies and food synergies. Those are what I underrated about it. I knew that it would be solid if you could build around it from a increase its power standpoint. But the ability to even cash it in for the Savvy Hunter, because Savvy Hunter attacks, makes a food, and you're like, I need something better than this. I'm going to sack it and the new food and draw a card. The Tempting Witch can chuck a cookie, chuck the brute at their face at the end of the game. And I also noticed things like, Flutterfox really likes to be aggro with a brute because brute comes down on 1 and bam, you've got a 2/2 flyer on 2, that kind of thing. And you just don't necessarily see all of those synergies when you're doing a set review or you're just taking a look at the card list for the first time. And that's where you need results to fully understand the picture of what this card has to offer. But it's not being results oriented. You're not changing your process for assessing cards or changing how you build a deck or whatever because of the outcome of one experience or something like that.
Yeah, or the most recent experience, or the most recent very good or very bad experience that you had. These are all indicators that you might be weighing them too heavily, because what we really try to do on this podcast, and what we've tried to do for 10 years now, since Ryan and I started it, right, is to address these tendencies that the human brain has to give us information that's wrong. Right. And there's lots of studies that have been done on many of these type of, I don't know how to describe them, but, these things that people do that suggest that it might be evolutionary in nature, where, if we tend in these directions, it actually helps us, in past years. But we have to fight our brains a lot now where we live, what we're doing now, because if our brains were evolved over time for the conditions that those brains were in, those conditions over the last just few hundred years have changed more than in the prior 50,000 or 10,000 or whatever 1,000 years, right? Like the changes that we've had are have been too fast for our brains to keep up. That much is for sure. And so we actually have the luxury of trying to recognize when our brains are telling us things that are wrong. And it's a very simple, very human thing to have something bad happen to you and then you not want to repeat it, right? It's just a very knee-jerk reaction, sort of a base, like maybe perhaps the most base level logic of a human brain, which is bad thing happened to me, don't do bad thing, right? There's fire. I put my hand in the fire because it's shiny. I burn my hand. I say, I'm not going to do that again. And that is a very strong baseline. You want that to be your baseline. But when we start to get into much more complex things like games, like magic, like life in many scenarios, it is not that simple. You absolutely can do the correct right thing and have the outcome not come out how you want in the short term. And if you act on it, that's the disaster, right? That if you do something correctly and it doesn't work out, and then you say, I'm never going to do that correct thing again, that's the disaster. It's not the short-term loss that you took from, air quotes, playing correctly, but just getting burned on it or whatever. It's the long-term of adopting a bad habit that we're trying to help you avoid. And that's what, one of the ways that we address that is by using the term ROTty or talking about being results oriented. Because you see this stuff in life all the time, just like in magic, right? Where somebody will, really suss out a situation, have good numbers, good logic, really have kind of thought through the whole thing, move ahead with a plan, and then the plan doesn't work out because of unforeseen circumstances or unfortunate things that happen, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like if that person simply took that same approach that they took for that plan and just applied it to everything for the rest of their life, they would reach success no matter what. Like you get a lot of chances in your life at little things, big things to try to get it right. And even if a few of them don't work out, if you have this sort of thorough, logical, hopefully data driven, like you have some numbers or some reasons to do the things that you want to do and you keep doing it, you will absolutely meet with success. Because what ends up happening is when you look at these things on the long term, the little graph goes up and up and up, at a fairly steady clip. And if you zoom in on any of those little graph points, you'll see some ups and downs in there. This happens in poker. This also happens in magic, where things go up and down all the time. But if you zoom out and just keep using that process over and over, then you will find success. And what we want you to not do is to sit down with a particular card at a magic game or a particular strategy or a particular shortcut, like you mentioned, the lands thing or whatever, and then start throwing this good things out the window because it didn't work for a draft or a game or a play or whatever, because you're too heavily weighing the results of a small sample size there. And if you can do that, if you can have the discipline to say, I did the right thing and it didn't work out, and I'm going to continue to do the right thing and resist that urge that you're going to get that says, well, that sucked. Don't do that anymore. Do something else. Right. If you can resist that, then you'll actually end up coming out way ahead.
Well, and also, the flip side of like, did you do the wrong thing, or is the right thing not working out? That's the tough part to understand. Am I on the wrong path here, or is this the right path and variance is getting me right now?
Yeah.
And I just want to reinforce for everybody that the way you know the difference is that you can explain why you're on the wrong path. You need to be able to come up with something other than, well, I keep losing to it. I keep losing to Ginger Brute. Therefore, I'm going to change my opinion of it. That's a fine place. I keep losing to Ginger Brute is a fine place to start. But you don't end there. You don't stop it. And that's all the information I need. You need to say, why? Why do I keep losing to a card that I didn't think was going to be this much of a factor? And if you can't answer that question and you just blindly change, then I worry that you are just you suffered some short-term variance and are now doing the equivalent of changing your land base from 17 because you got flooded. That's something that experienced Magic players just don't do anymore. They get the math of that, but it can be much harder to, quote, get the math of card evaluation changes and understanding how a format has changed. Like speed of format is frequently a reason. I didn't realize the format was this slow or fast, and that has changed how good like divination is, for example. There's a lot of cards we see again and again and again whose evaluations change from format to format. So that should drive home how difficult it is to do this, because even cards that are identical, like a literal reprinting, can end up feeling different. But you just, as long as you're on a path where you are thinking about the why and can articulate why before you make a change to your process or make a change to your pick order or how you evaluate, this deck build, then you're on the right path. And even though you're thinking about results, you're not being a results-oriented thinker, if that makes sense. I hope it does.
Absolutely, it does. I hope so too. So consider these things when you're facing a situation within, not just Magic, but anything that you care about, right? Just consider these things on, hey, can I actually explain why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing? Is there a chance that I'm overreacting to not enough information? And kind of check yourself at the door there, because, changing is good, right? Like adjusting is good. That's how you can stay ahead. That's how you can, keep up or whatever is by paying attention and stuff. So don't take the words literally for results oriented thinking. Take the term. Like, if you've listened to everything that we've said on here and on the show in general, you'll have a much better idea of it and it'll actually be useful for you. Where if you just dismiss it as, well, that's stupid. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be results oriented because that's the information that I have. Well, you absolutely can have both. Should we talk Arena, right?
Yeah, let's do a check-in there. They did a state of the program, state of the game, so we should talk about that.
Yeah. So what has been going on Arena? I've been playing it. What's it called? Standard on it to practice for some events that I'm in the booth for. But largely for Throne of Eldraine, outside of a handful of drafts, maybe 5 or something, I've been drafting on Magic Online.
Well, you don't want to draft a mill deck and face 7 mill decks?
No, I don't, honestly.
Well, let's start. Even before we get into the state of the program, let me just say again, I often feel like Dr. Frankenstein when it comes to the Arena bots, because I was part of the small team that implemented those to begin with when I was working on Arena. I never designed it to be the load-bearing feature for all of draft. It was supposed to be, in my mind, a shallow end for low clock, low pressure drafting for newer drafters, kind of a kiddie pool of drafting. And instead it's just the whole pool. It's the whole ocean. Mm-hmm. And you can make an argument that they can just improve the bots. And I think they should. I do think the shallow end, the bots should continue to exist to give a no clock drafting option. But if they can get the population to support it, I wish they would move all human drafting up on the priority order. It would be an amazing improvement to Arena and would convert many people who are resisting. And it's really exposing itself. High synergy formats and high synergy strategies are going to really expose the weakness of the bots. And this is just, it's not even necessarily that the format is a high synergy format, but there's a couple of obvious high synergy decks. And if the bots aren't aware of how to draft those decks, they become pretty absurd.
Yeah, so, I think Throne of Eldraine is the worst case scenario that
right.
we've had so far.
Absolutely, it is,
and it also just feels like it's gotten worse. Like, yeah, I'm concerned about it at this point because I kind of was thinking the whole time, well, they'll do it, or maybe it'll be a thing, and it really hasn't. And I don't know, like they've been so silent on it. And I get it. Like, I understand that they can't just go around making promises and then not keeping them, or, letting all their plans out of the bag when those plans change sometimes. So I totally understand their perspective on it, but, they really haven't told us anything. And it's starting to feel like they're fine with the bots, right? It feels like, at least from the outside as a consumer, it's just kind of like, do you see this as an issue? And, I don't know if they do. And
no, their behavior suggests that they don't. I mean,
right.
It just makes me nervous. Mentioned it in the sense that they do communicate pretty heavily about what's on the horizon. In fact, we're going to get into that right now about their communications about what's on the horizon. But it becomes a statement by omission, that they're talking about all these priorities they have, and human drafts don't come up at all. The last time it came up in any kind of discussion officially out of Wizards, it was in the bucket of wild ideas for the future, right? Like we have all these priorities, and then here's our bucket of wild ideas, and they threw it in that bucket. Like it's not even close is the bottom line based on their stated priorities within the last few months. And so I'm going to continue to use whatever megaphone I have to yell as loudly as I can that Wizards should increase the priority of all human drafting on Arena. It would dramatically change the landscape and draw in a whole new crop of players. If they're experiencing any kind of slowdown of incoming players, which might be one of the reasons, why you avoid something like, again, fire rate is king, both in matchmaking and in pairing up for a pod of drafting. And so the idea that instead of just clicking and drafting, you have to click and then wait for 7 others and then draft, that's something that I think scares them a bit. But I also think that offering that would bring in a whole new crop of players who are just waiting for that. So I'm going to keep using whatever voice I have in the community to hopefully reach the ears of some of my former colleagues at Wizards and maybe influence some thought towards change in that direction. So I'm not sure what their exact thinking is on it, but I'm going to continue to argue my case from outside now.
Yeah, is it just that limited is just the small fish in a big pond?
I don't think that's.
I mean, I'm assuming if you look at how many people, like how many matches are played or whatever, that it's dwarfed by Constructed, right? I mean, we don't know that, but I mean, it's dwarfed.
No, we can know that basically because draft costs. Not everybody wants to do it, and it costs resources. Whereas play is just so you can get. If you're going to play for free, you're probably playing Constructed for the most part. In terms of,
but does Wizards make money then more money off of like, let's say we took a player who only played Constructed and a player who only played Limited, they make more money off a Limited player, right?
Yeah.
I'm buying gems sometimes, right?
If somebody is just piling on the gems, but also they may be in a spot with a free-to-play game like Arena, where if I'm just patient and dole out my Limited play over the course of a set, I maybe don't need to invest a bunch of money. I can put in my time. I can do my gold grinding. I mean, on my account on Going Optimal, my 1-year streaming anniversary is on November 21st, and I've drafted 4.5 times a week for an entire year on $5 on the $5 welcome purchase. And so there's something
crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
It is awesome.
Wow. That's awesome.
And actually we have about 20,000 in gems. So I have $100 worth of gems stockpiled, and we've only spent $5 in the last year to draft for it on average 4.5 times a week.
Do you regret spending the $5?
No, because it did give me a nice
such good
start.
Value. Yeah, but it would have sounded cooler if you said you did it for free, right?
Right. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know. They can learn core lessons from their own statistics. Like, I think part of the lack of support for like best of 3 is that they can point to, well, most of the play is best of 1. It's like, well, yeah, sure, that 90-something% of the play is best of 1 because 90-something% of the time people are trying to just get in their games really quickly and grind their gold for the day and be done, So I don't know. It's dangerous for Wizards to be too results oriented too, in terms of just looking at numbers and not thinking of the why behind them.
I give them a lot of credit. There's a lot of smart people. I just worry, right? I just worry that like they go, well, maybe not that many people are playing limited, right? So maybe we shouldn't focus on it. And it's like, well, that's the reason why you should, right? Because it's like, it's, anyway, I don't actually, that they might laugh at hearing me say that anyway, because they're very focused
I can't fully explain what their thinking is, but I can say that for most game companies, it is ultimately about increasing revenue and increasing play and retention. They want people to play more often, stick around, and spend. And every decision is driven by that. And that doesn't make it nefarious. That's just business. And I know from my experience inside that basically there is a strong desire to increase all of that stuff through player happiness, right? Nobody's trying to be evil about it, other than the way in which capitalism is inherently evil, right? It's like they just are trying to make money through player happiness, and they feel that their decisions are prioritizing that accordingly. And I'm disagreeing. But that's the other thing. I mean, I'm sure there are people in the building making my arguments, right? It's not that everybody on the arena team is in lockstep with each other philosophically. It's that the buck stops somewhere, and right now the buck is stopping with someone who doesn't prioritize this. And there you go. We'll see if that changes. So keep what you can do as a listener, as a player who wants change on that as well. Be tactful. Be sure to let companies know what your gaming pain points are. Treat it like going to a doctor. You wouldn't go to a doctor and say, I've got tendonitis, right? You'd go to a doctor and say, my elbow hurts, right? And then you let the doctor figure out whether it's tendonitis, bursitis, whatever it is, right? And a lot of people in giving feedback to a game company want to be prescriptive and tell them exactly what they should do. And your opinions are going to be held as more valuable and more influential if you focus on your pain. Focus on communicating what is painful about a current situation and let them prescribe the diagnosis and prescription and prescribe a solution, But they do listen. I've been in meetings at Wizards of the Coast where literal tweets from random people have been read out loud because it made a point so succinctly and clearly that someone wanted to share it with the room. So, but I've never seen someone's rude, awful, die in a fire type response to a game company ever end up brought up in a meeting or shared as valuable. So, keep it civil.
Okay, so what has been going on with Arena besides the plight of the limited player?
Yeah, let's hit on their state of the game because let's be clear, they did not talk about this at all in the state of the game article, which is again a statement by omission. But let's talk about what they did speak to, and I'll just run down really quick. We'll include in the show notes a link to the state of the game article for November. They do it once a month. First thing they mentioned is performance, that they recognize performance has been suffering. I know that's part of what drove you back to Magic Online, because you're operating on it on a Mac through Parallels or whatever was no longer stable enough for you.
It actually just crashed. Yeah, it gave me a weird error and would crash, 3 or 4 times a match. It was weird because my computers are good enough to run it. They would die. Yeah.
And so they're aware, and they gave a lot of kind of technical explanations that I don't really care about, other than to know that they're aware and working on it. Great, work it out, Wizards. The next thing they bring up is the a friend system improvements are coming. This is something I've known has been important to the team since even when I was there. It was high on the list as I was leaving the company a year and a half ago. And that is this, the idea that social is so vital to the longevity of digital free-to-play experiences now. Just on the industry inside, you just see again and again how much value a friend system brings to a platform like this, because it's one thing to know that you can show up and play Magic on Arena. It's another thing to know that you can show up, meet your friends, and play Magic on Arena. And that kind of system has been missing. They have Friend Challenge, but that's pretty awkward. You need to kind of know about it. It's not in your face at all. I bet they don't get a high use on that.
Right.
But what they're starting with is basically offering a good buddy list, a good friend list, so that you can add friends on the system to your friend list, see if they are online or offline from your client, and then easily challenge them to games from an interface like that. That makes a lot of sense. They also talk about deck sharing. I'm not sure if they mean that since we're just playing casually, I can literally loan you a deck. Like, you don't have the cards for it, but no worries, here, you can play mine. Or if they're just saying, hey, I have a deck list I want to send to you, rather than sending you an email outside of the client, I can just click this button here and share it within the client. Not sure what they mean in those two, but something like that is coming. Either one would be nice, but obviously literally loaning a friend a deck for a casual game between you and your friend is a pretty cool idea. That's all been expected, that we'd be seeing some improvements to that system. One of the things they then touch on is basically curation of formats and play availability. They have recently introduced Brawl on Arena, and anecdotally, just from seeing my Twitter feed and hearing people's reaction to it, people really love it. You know, that it's it's a really nice way to play on Arena. Even though Brawl didn't like catch fire with the paper game, it makes a lot of sense for Arena, especially for the transition that you want to have players go through. You know, when you think about, again, what decisions game makers are thinking about as they design their systems, it's that retention thing. You want to get the player to try your game, and then you have like somewhere between 5 minutes and a half hour to get them, you know, to bring them in and get you to come back. And you want to have a clear progression of how you're getting somebody from a brand new Magic player to someone locked in and in for life. You know, they're a total lifestyle gamer with Magic now. What's the path look like? And there's a lot of big hurdles along the way that can bounce players off and drive them away from the game. And one of them is just, frankly, card availability for something that you actually want to do. It's pretty demoralizing as a new player to have a haphazard collection of commons and uncommons and a handful of rares and mythics that you picked up here and there, and you do your best build with it, and then you face Oko on turn 2 and are like, what am I even doing, right? Like, what is the point of this? And so Brawl was set up for paper as a way to help with that transition, because what happens, players buy a few packs, maybe they draft a few times, they do a sealed deck, and they end up with this collection that's a bunch of one-ofs, a bunch of random bits and pieces. So having a standard 60-card commander-style format makes a lot of sense for giving players a meaningful play experience with that kind of collection that doesn't face them against people with much greater resources that are going to just, crush them into the dirt. So it makes a whole lot of sense. But and it's working. It hooray! It's been embraced by the Arena players. So then they say only Wednesdays. And that's made a lot of people upset. Like, why can't I play this at other times? And, I'll let you read. You can read their take on it for themselves. Like, they say, okay, I'll read this part. They say, we completely understand the desire for more on-demand play, so you can play formats other than what's currently being offered. That's why we're continuing to expand direct challenge options and add additional social features beyond the friends list. So what I hear them saying is, yeah, we're only going to let you compete in Brawl tournaments on Wednesdays, but you're going to be able to challenge your friends at Brawl 24/7. I think that's coming up a little bit short, Wizards. I'm not sure where their head's at with this exactly, other than play fire rate is king. Again, anytime you add a queue to your game, you are increasing the wait times to get paired in all your other queues. You just are. If you're not consistently increasing your player base, every time you add an alternate experience, you are diluting the wait times on each of your experiences and making each of them worse. So it's a real deal for companies to consider that factor. And I feel like that must be at the root of why they're not allowing this to be a little wider. What I would like to see is that, yes, it's fine for me. It's fine if they want to say I can only compete for a entry fee and prizes in Brawl on Wednesday, but I ought to be able to match with a rando 24/7. It must be a Q health thing, but I don't fully understand it, and I'm a little disappointed. I feel like the middle ground is to expand this notion of, well, I can challenge Marshall at Brawl any given time, to I can find somebody to play casual Brawl with any given time, and then only keep the queues, the buy-in queues open on certain days. I think they're going to go get a lot of pushback on this. This is, again, all of my feedback suggestions are intact. If you have big issues with anything Wizards is doing, you can express yourself in ways that are better heard by the staff there than others, and just try to keep it diplomatic. But absolutely press on them with this. If you're really disappointed in your inability to play Brawl on a Tuesday afternoon against a random, then let them know. I think they'll work towards change on that front. But my gut says that maybe acquisition has slowed down a bit on Arena, that they experienced an initial huge push. But if they're not just piling on, if the player base isn't clearly growing, then they must be very gun shy about splitting their audience with adding on queues. That's my guess. But I don't know. It just feels like you want to give people that option. But they tried to defend those decisions. You can let them know how you feel about it, but that's what they're saying. I'd like to see it broaden a little bit. Then the next thing they cover is kind of interesting and something near and dear to my heart: the remastered set idea. They say later next year we plan to begin adding remastered versions of older sets to Magic the Gathering Arena. In conjunction with Magic R&D, they'll be looking at multiple sets and condensing them into a single larger set that only includes the most relevant cards and adding that to the game. So, for example, the first example of this, and I say near and dear to my heart because I was on the team that did this, was Tempest remastered for Magic Online. Our idea was that Tempest was a set that first players didn't have a lot of, there were some valuable cards in Tempest that were underprinted, so to speak, air quotes, on Magic Online. And they wanted to get more of those into the Magic Online ecosystem, but also a feeling like, Tempest was designed for limited back before R&D knew how to do that. Maybe if we took these 3 Tempest block sets and cut 2/3 of the cards ish, 2 were small, 1 was large, but cut a bunch of the cards and make 1 large set out of all 3 blocks, we could probably make a tighter, better draft experience that still had, we weren't making new cards. It was still going to be all the cards you knew and loved, but we would focus almost like making a cube out of a block, but
out of a subset of cards, like a block. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like they're going to continue that on the road to basically getting to Pioneer. They mentioned that Pioneer is one of the formats they're working towards, and they're saying it's going to be so far out that it's not worth saying much more than that about, which I get. But basically, it does show a long road they're heading down, and I think it's a good way to do it.
That's really cool. I mean, that's basically them saying we're going to backlog all the important cards, at least to a point. That's right. That's a big deal. We wondered for a long time whether they would do that.
There's just a lot of useless Magic cards, frankly.
That's a lot
of cards that are so bad they're just not good for anything. Nobody drafts them in limited, and nobody plays them in constructed, and they can go to the dustbin of Magic history, and nobody would care all that much. So they get to truly distill these blocks down to their essence, and I look forward to the results. Makes me want to kind of work on it. It was fun to work on with Tempest, and I'm sure it would be fun to work on any of these sets. Part of it is Mark Rosewater talks about how restriction breeds creativity, and there's something invigorating about knowing that there's no new cards here. You know exactly what your palette is. Here are your tools. Go. And you get backed into a corner sometime, but it's so rigid, it's actually, it can be useful to the creative process. So it was cool to see that they're doing that. That's them on their road to, Pioneer. But the other thing that they announced that's pretty important is an update on the historic situation. So for those of you who don't know, historic is effectively for you Hearthstone players, like the wild of Arena. Basically, when stuff rotates out of standard, what do I do with it on Arena? And their answer is you play historic. So effectively, historic is vintage for Arena. And but they don't want it to just be that. They want it needs to occupy this interesting space, right? And they acknowledge this in the article, that the trouble with such a thing is, like, we've rotated into Eldraine. It's not going to feel historic isn't going to feel different enough as current standard plus the 4 rotated sets, right? That's only a slight difference, and they want it. You need to position historic so that it feels a lot different from just standard plus, but you also don't want to make it feel like, oh, this is just modern minus or even pioneer minus, right? So the way they're going to approach that is to inject the game on a quarterly basis with some historic only cards. And that's a really interesting way to approach that problem, because historic is an Arena only thing. It doesn't need to follow any rules other than here's the cards we made legal in it, such that you can do interesting things like making some legacy card that's not even legal in modern, legal in historic, right? That's one way to do it. If I were on that team brainstorming how to approach it, I think it's pretty clear that you want to inject build-arounds, right? Cards that can be built around interestingly, but you don't just want to insert build-arounds that are poster child build-arounds for other formats. So pick whatever, the Tron lands or something for modern, right? They're not going to reprint Tron lands in Arena for historic, because that's too close to making it modern. Like what they're going to want to do is find cool build-arounds that aren't dominating modern, and they don't expect to dominate Pioneer. Right. And so to that end, they've announced their first 20 cards. I don't think we should do a full set review, but we'll certainly link to it. But let me tell you what 20 cards they have added. And I'm just going to read the titles. So for those of you who know the names, you'll recognize it. And then we'll touch on a couple that are relevant. But Sarah Ascendant, Soul Warden, Kinsbale Cavalier, Treasure Hunt, Distant Melody, Crypt Breaker, Hypnotic Spectre, Phyrexian Arena, Tendrils of Corruption, Kiln Fiend, Goblin Matron, Second Right. I forget how to pronounce this.
It's Hitasugu.
Hitasugu's Second Right, Elvish Visionary, Fauna Shaman, Imperious Perfect, Burning Tree Emissary, Captain Sisay, Ornithopter, Mindstone, and Darksteel Reactor. So there's some oddballs here that I don't quite understand. Like, I'm not sure what they're going for with Treasure Hunt and Distant Melody exactly. I mean, obviously,
Kinsbale Cavalier.
Kinsbale Cavalier, for those of you who don't know, is 3 and a white for a 2/2 Kithkin Knight that says night creatures you control have double strike. So on the one hand, well, duh, it's there to support a night tribal deck, right?
Right.
But we're talking about an eternal format. It's only going to get more and more powerful. And I just question how a 4-mana 2/2 is going to survive as relevant in a format whose power level is only going to increase over time. There may
what else stands out to you?
Let's see. Mind Stone. So there's two types of things here. There's the build-arounds, and then there's here, let's just juice up let's add some generic power. So Mind Stone is a 2-mana artifact that has tap, add 1 colorless, and 1 tap and sacrifice, draw a card. So the idea of the awesome. Mind Stone is that early on it accelerates you, and later on you cash it in for a card when you've got plenty of mana. Historically, this has been a great card for control decks. Aggro doesn't really want to do that on 2. But if you can play this on 2 as a control deck and then have your sweepers a turn early and then cash it in for a card later, that's kind of exactly what those types of control decks need. So that looks like a control deck plant. Elvish Visionary and Imperious Perfect both point towards an effort to make an elf tribal deck be a thing in Historic. Yeah. And Fauna Shaman is interesting. That's a 2/2 for 2 that you can basically, for green mana, pitch one creature card in your hand and go find a creature card from your deck. So that's a nice build around in terms of basically getting 5th through 8th copies of some important creature that's instrumental to your deck, or just you want a toolbox type situation to go fetch what you need for a situation. Mm-hmm. There's some life gain stuff here that looks like they're pushing a life gain deck.
Perhaps I don't know the nod to mono black with Tendrils of Corruption.
Yeah, it seems like with Tendrils, and that's kind of a weird one. Tendrils is 3 and a black for an instant. It deals X damage to target creature, and you gain X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. So there's some support in there for a mono black type deck. It's kind of an oddball collection. Like, I don't, Ornithopter is there. I assume they've. I mean, I haven't thought about this as much as the designers. I'm sure that they've come up with exactly why Ornithopter slots in interestingly into Historic or whatever. But I think they're going to play around with this. They're going to do this kind of thing every 3 months. And I'm sure they'll take away cards that aren't working, or they can ignore cards that aren't working. But if a card works too well, they can take it out. I don't have a lot of thoughts beyond some of these cards are weird to me, but a lot of them fall in exactly what I expect, which is just, here's a little power juice for an Eternal format, and here's some funky build-arounds that aren't exactly modern runaway hits, but could still be part of something and help define this format.
Yeah, if you want, interesting to see where they go.
Yeah, and also as a insider aside, it's interesting that they're going with this. Basically, because in order to acquire these, you can either use wild cards on a 1-for-1 level if you have wild cards in your arena account, or you can pay 3,400 gems and get 4 copies of each of these. Just boom, buy 4X, buy a playset. Mm-hmm. And Wizards usually shies away from that kind of thing. They don't like non-randomized products that aren't in playable decks. That basically, Wizards likes to sell play experiences. And so a commander deck that's known top to bottom exactly what 100 cards are going to be in there. It's a fixed product, but at least it's an in-the-box play experience. And then your boosters that you get that are randomized, well, they aren't a deck, but everything they put into a booster, basically, they make with an idea of limited in mind. So that becomes a limited play experience. Here we have a situation where it is not they're selling us something that is not in and of itself a play experience. And one of the reasons they tend to avoid that is it feels a little bit secondary markety, right? How is this not Wizards just selling me 4 copies of Fauna Shaman as though it were a card store, right? Right. And normally they have strenuously avoided anything that approached them looking like they are sellers of singles. But in this case, the digital situation, I think, does make it different enough. And it's really kind of the only solution here. Like, you just have to bite the bullet and do something that Wizards typically doesn't like to do in order to serve the needs of the experience they're creating overall. So I just thought I'd call that out as kind of it's something that struck me, is that this is not a typical way that Wizards approaches getting cards into your hands.
Yeah, kind of interesting to see if they go a different direction there.
But yeah, we'll keep an eye on this. And I don't have a sense yet either of whether 3,400 gems is worth it. It's certainly not to me as a heavy limited player. I'm just focusing on playing as much limited as I can for free, but also getting enough cards to have fun in Constructed, but I'm not spending my in-game resources on it. But your mileage may vary, of course.
Right. Any other state of the game stuff you want to hit before we get to the questions?
Let's see. I think that's it. Yeah. That's it. Okay. That's the big stuff. So I guess I'd say one thing I would say about Arena, a quick piece of final advice to people. If you are someone who drafts heavily and cares about your collection, and you end up in if you're finding from set to set that what happens is that you 4X the set, you get 4X of the mythics and the rares of a set before you're done drafting it, and you're price sensitive, you may want to consider creating a throwaway side account that you maintain a little bit of a grind on. You don't have to be a slave to it or anything, but when you think about it, go in and play your games, get some gold, and then you can build up some extra resources on this side account. And once you're 4x'd of your set on your main account, move your limited play to that side account and just start using the resources you've built up over there. And the reason you do this is because you still grind gold on your main account. Now you play constructed, you play some standard on your main account, and you build up gold and wild cards and prizes and stuff on that account, but you're not spending any of it on limited. And therefore, all of those resources that, like, you'd be getting this pack and get 20 gems out of it. And as a pure limited player, maybe that's fine. But if you like constructed, maybe instead of getting 20 gems now, you'd rather wait and get a fresh rare from the next set. And so if by creating a secondary account and moving your limited play to that account when you've 4x'd your main account, you can manage your resources for the upcoming set better. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an approach for what I imagine to be a lot of LR listener approaches.
For sure. So here's the questions. This first one's a nice big picture, somewhat open-ended one. This one comes from Dylan, who says, I took a brief hiatus from Magic and now I'm back and I've been hearing a ton about Arena. What's the TLDR?
Well, you kind of just heard it. Like, you're a
LR but you were deep in the woods. Like, what's the big picture on Arena?
I'm going to pull it back and say,
or weeds, I should say.
Yeah, the TLDR of Arena is it's really, I'm trying to come up with a good phrasing of it, but basically, it's the least expensive way to play Magic that the game has ever offered, and it's the best digital experience the game has ever offered. Yep. There's a lot of improvements. If you've made it this far in the show, we feel there are some improvements to be made. But the free-to-play economy really does allow people to play this game and play it deeply and have a deep, deep standard collection, multiple tier 1 decks with very low investment, especially if you have a pretty high win percentage in limited. And I assume our listeners are hopefully a little above 50% in the world because we're helping them get there. Yeah,
of course. Antonio says, this gets kind of personal. He says, first of all, I'd like to apologize to Ryan for some insensitive Twitter comments. I'm sorry.
I don't remember them, Antonio, but I forgive you. And being able to apologize is a skill not everybody has. So well done.
He says, and secondly, I wanted to ask him how the transition has been these past months from a corporate life at Wizards to a streamer/content creator. For example, how did your family take the decision? He says, I haven't caught the stream that much, but I have watched some YouTube videos and I like the interaction and rapport you have established with the chat. Thank you.
Well, let me tell you,
you said you're almost a year in now, right?
Yeah. 1 year anniversary on the 21st of November.
Dang, crazy. That went fast.
Let me tell you, it's a long way to the top if you want to play video games on the internet. It is about as hard as I've worked for as low a pay as I could get for a year. But that time on the air, my time on stream is just about my favorite part of the day. Partly, life has a lot of pressures and personal, business, life, and otherwise that bear down on us at all times. We're all dealing with our own stuff, mm-hmm. And I am too. And man, when I just flip on the switch and we go live, I love that I put everything else aside and I'm focused on me and my stream viewers, and we have fun for a few hours. And it's really a cathartic, wonderful part of my day that I value a lot, such that if I do decide that I need to do something more lucrative, I do not intend to stop streaming. I would just switch how I streamed. One of the reasons I decided to start streaming is because my kids are almost grown. My daughter just started college this year. My son's a junior in high school, and I'm going to be an empty nester pretty soon. And I always figured, well, let's get the streaming plate spinning. And then if I move back into more traditional work choices, I can move my streaming to the evenings. I'm not on the spot dad all the time anymore. And it'd actually be nice to have some hobbies post primary fatherhood. We never stop being parents, but you know what I mean? When the nest is empty, it'll be good to have that to do. So the transition has been great in that sense. I really miss Wizards in many, many ways. Miss the talented people I was working with, miss impacting what happens to my favorite game in such a direct way. But it's also been a really interesting time for my family. I've only been able to do this because my wife and I basically switched roles. She had been stay-at-home parent for several years and was ready to reinvigorate her own career. And it happened at a time where I was transitioning out of Wizards, and basically my wife, being incredible and talented and just kicking serious butt at her new job, have given us the sense of comfort to allow me to try and build something right now, and to try and make this a thing. It was always a long shot that this could be this is what I do for the rest of my life or whatever, but it was never in doubt that it was something I wanted to try and something I wanted to build. And it's really amazing. I did a lot of draft videos and draft articles before I started at Wizards, but that was all pre-Twitch. And the difference between creating content to a microphone and a camera versus creating content with an interactive audience, it's night and day. It's incredible. And I am so lucky that the limited resources listeners stuck with me and gave me a chance, because I know that any amount of success that I have had is due to the fact that I built up some capital on this show and was able to come back and tell people to give me a chance. And if you haven't checked out my stream, it's great. I love my chat. I love my viewers, and we have a great time, learn a lot, mostly Magic, some side chats, etc. But my family has been super supportive, if a little nervous and my kids think it's awesome, but they don't care.
Yeah,
they're not looking at our bank account. They're just looking at their dad is streaming video games, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, which is, by the way, kind of cool. All right, Jeremy says, under what conditions should I consider resigning from an event? Sometimes I'm just more excited to do my next draft rather than play out my current deck. This is especially true when I think I'm going to lose. I basically never do, but if you ever get into a position where you think actively trying to play out this event is a chore, go ahead and do it. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your time. We're all in the game of life, which is the one big long time to happiness conversion game. And if playing out your event is not going to convert time to happiness efficiently for you, resign and move on. No big deal. It's all about your own personal happiness and not holding yourself to some standard that we're setting or anybody else in the world is setting. But if you're finding yourself constantly doing that, like giving up on a deck, this isn't good enough, I'm just going to keep bailing, you're probably hurting your game improvement. I mean, maybe you'll be happier because you're only playing decks that you're happy with. And if you got bottomless pockets, who cares? Yeah, sure, just draft until you've got a 10 out of 10 every time or something. But you'll find that some of your most impressive and memorable wins are the times where you made some good choices with a lesser deck and came out ahead anyway. That happened today. Like I said, I didn't have a great mill deck today, but we managed to win four games against better mill decks. They were all better than mine. And we managed, I beat an Oko. I beat a turn 3 Oko today. And it would have been pretty easy to say, this mill deck ended up being pretty garbagey. It only has 2 secret keepers and is just whatever, but I think chase happiness. But if you're trying to improve at your game, you're going to find a lot to learn in scrapping with a bad deck. So for sure. Next one is from Andrew, who says, what's the payoff when you start getting the gems for every card in a pack opened? And then he also says, is that from full set annihilation? What does that mean?
I'm not exactly sure what's the payoff. You start getting gems in packs when you have gotten 4 copies of all the rares and mythics, or one or the other. Like, basically, let's say you have all 4x of every rare, but not 4x of every mythic. You'll start to get gems if you would have opened a rare, and but you'll keep getting actual mythics if you were going to open a mythic. So the payoff is just, it's a way to say, well, you're not getting nothing. What am I getting out of opening a pack once I already have all the cards? Well, you're getting some gems back. And that's why I suggested at the end of the arena segment to go ahead and create a second account. If you care about collection building, you really don't want to keep drafting for a set you already have, because it's value that's a little bit lost relative to the power of saving those resources to draft a new set that you don't have 4x of yet. But that's what's going on. It's a you did it. You 4x the set, and now you get gems instead of cards. So yeah.
I wonder if this if this actually answers the next question, which is from Atupong, who says, "Hi Ryan, what's your strategy to complete playsets for Constructed on Arena with the minimum investment possible?"
Yeah, I think I did hit on that. I mean, that's what I would suggest. If you're a limited focus player, but you like to collection build, the most efficient way to build is to spend your resources on limited. The drawback is you don't get the cards instantly. And we were talking earlier about, well, who makes more money for Wizards, limited players or constructed players? Mm-hmm. And limited players tend to keep paying over time across a format. But constructed players are the ones buying a box on day one, and on Arena buying enough gems to rack up a bunch of new cards from the new set. So if you have the patience, the best way to approach Arena, and you can even do this in paper too, in my mind, as a mixed player, is to really focus on limited up front. This does two things. It allows you to build up your rares and mythics through limited play, and it allows Constructed to shake itself out a little bit, so you get a better idea of the meta before you invest in wild cards on your given deck. And so that's what I suggest, is basically spend all of your money, your gems, your gold, and your time early on limited to build up your collection. And then if you ever 4x your collection, switch to playing Constructed on your main account and create a backup account, free-to-play account that you grind every once in a while so that it has enough resources to continue your limited play while stockpiling your resources on your main account for the next set.
Mm-hmm. Mark says, besides live drafts, what improvements to Arena do you want most? What's your number one, besides what we talked about earlier? Humans?
Well, that's the go-to. Yeah. This is a weird one, but it bugs me because I didn't spec it this way and it never got implemented the way I wanted it to be implemented, which is deck importing and exporting. It's ridiculous that you need to have a set name and some random number. Like, it's ridiculous. I need to be able to say 4 space, Fauna Shaman, import that and have it put the freaking 4 Fauna Shamans right there. It drives me nuts that basically you cannot hand enter. You can't just put in a text file with a number and a card name and have it actually produce that deck. You need to give this other specific stuff that nobody remembers or knows. And so I just want more functional deck importing, exporting, and frankly, deck sharing. And to extend that a little bit, I would like game sharing. I guess like my number one big improvement, because I think fixing your importing and exporting is kind of a small thing, actually. But the big thing that I would like is replay sharing. Imagine that I offline, whatever, or anybody, you just play what is like the most incredible game of Magic that you've ever played in your life. And there's a button and you click it, and you get it posts a tweet, it says, here's this game I just played, check it out. And someone clicks on that, it opens it up in the client, and you get to you can watch a full forward, backward replay of a given game. It shouldn't be that difficult, because ultimately Magic is such a regimented game that any given game should be able to be stripped down into a list of the functional rules interactions that happen from
there's a log, right, with all that stuff in there,
Right. So turning game logs into shareable replays would be incredible and would build community, it would build the social, and it would allow players to really share what's amazing about this game, which is just some of the remarkable games it produces.
Yeah. Eric says, I have a couple questions about optimizing for Arena's economy. First, I know I want to use my wild cards up so that I get more gems for my rares as I get a playset of the current set. But I'd like to get your thoughts on whether it's correct to just burn them all to start and start getting those gems right away, or whether it's better to use them sparingly as you know you're going to hit a playset of specific rares. Will I get more wild cards sooner if I just use them up?
You don't get the rate of wild card acquisition is going to be consistent regardless of what you're talking about. So maybe I'm missing the terminology, or we're crossing wires on exact terminology, but nothing you do is going to get you, quote, more wild cards sooner. But there's a lot of questions people have around, should I open my boosters, or should I save them? Should I, I've talked about there's a trick you can do. Let's say you have 3 copies of Oko, and you open pack 1, pick 1, a 4th copy of Oko. One thing you can do, if you're a limited only player, this is for limited only now, you don't care about constructed at all, and you have a bunch of wild cards around that you haven't done anything with, you can actually leave the draft, go to your collection, spend a mythic wild card to craft your 4th copy of Oko, go back into your draft, and then when you finish the draft, you're going to get 40 gems because now you've got a 5th copy of Oko, and that's what happens when you get a 5th copy of something. You get gems instead. Now, that's great for someone who only cares about limited because they've turned their wild card into gems that they can use for another event. If you care about constructed, though, you've just used up a wild card on gems instead of a different mythic. Like if the
card you need for your deck.
Yeah, if you would rather have an Embercleave, if you'd rather have your second Embercleave than 40 gems, you shouldn't do that. You should go craft your Embercleave, right? Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what you're in it for. Another thing that matters to that is like some people, they don't want to. They kind of for some people, ideal is I get to 4x of everything and then I start playing limited on my backup account, right? Like I was saying, if you're in that mode, and you don't care about constructed in the meantime, then you should technically stockpile all of your boosters, and only because, let's say I crack every booster I got, and hey, I got really lucky, and I opened 4 Okos pretty early on. Now, when I go into the draft, if I get that 5th copy of Oko, well, of course I'm going to draft it, but then it's 40 gems instead of something that helps fill out my collection. Now, imagine instead of opening those boosters, I held them. And so actually, I don't have any Okos yet. And I finally draft one, whatever. And then now later, because there's this duplication protection. Now, if I open the packs after, let's say I've built up like half the rares and a quarter of the mythics through limited play, and I've got this huge stockpile of boosters. Now the rare protection works in my favor. I've got 1 Oko, and now I get 3 more Okos. Now I'm done with Okos. The next time it would have we open an Oko, instead it's going to give me that Embercleave or some other mythic, right?
Right.
So if you open first, you're going to end up grinding gold. You're going to get gold out of gems out of boosters maybe before you want to. But again, if you're limited only, that's fine. But the trouble with stockpiling your boosters to try and use duplicate protection to your collection building advantage is it means that you have 0 Okos to play with until you finally decide to open your packs. So
I see.
And that's fine if all you want to do early is play limited, which is why I suggest, if you transition from heavy limited play to heavier constructed play, maybe that works out for you. But if you're someone who wants to, hey, I only have 2 Okos, but at least I got 2, then you're going to want to open your boosters so that you can use them as you get them.
I see. Eric has a follow-up question. Second, I don't understand the set mastery track at all. Are there economic edges to be gained by learning this system? I'm assuming I should just never spend gems on it. Can you speak to this?
Sure. I even wrote an article on this, which we can put in the show notes. But basically, as the answer with a lot of economic things on Arena is, the answer is it depends. But the nice thing about the Mastery Pass system is that if you wait to buy it, it backfills with everything you missed. So failing to buy early, there's no real penalty except that you don't have access to that stuff that you would get early. And by the end of it, like if you're guaranteed, if you knew 100% that you were going to max out your levels, it's actually a fine purchase, even for someone, even a limited player who doesn't care about any of the singles. Even if you don't care about singles at all, there is still going to be some value to the boosters you get because they will produce ultimately gems when you 4x the set. and you do actually earn gems and gold, such that by the end of it, let's say it costs like 3,400 gems, you basically get the equivalent of 3,400 gems in golden gems through the process of it. So if you're guaranteed to max it out, it's actually worth it. But in my article, I also linked to a tool that one of my viewers helped make, or just made. They didn't help make it; they made it. It's a tool, an Excel tool, to actually say, based on how you personally value these extra stuff, like how many gems is there's all this bling or whatever that has no play value but looks cool. Is that worth gems to you or not? Basically answer all these questions about what things are worth to you, and it spits out an answer of whether or not the purchase is good for you. So it depends, but actually it's for heavy players who are if you're going to complete 6 out of 7 of your quests every week and win 15 times a week, it's actually worth it. It is worth it.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Last question. I don't know if you have answers to this, but Matt says, are there plans for an Apple compatible version of Arena? What other platforms are under consideration or would be likely?
Oh yeah, this must be an older question, because I think even Wizards has spoken to this since this question was asked, and it does look like it's on its way. And certainly the decision to build Arena on Unity was in part due to the ease with which we could expand it to other platforms. So it looks like Apple iOS is going to be the first one, and we'll see from there. I question whether or not this is ever going to be on phones, because Magic is just not a game that was meant for a screen like that. But certainly getting it onto other tablet-style platforms also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, did they said Mac OS, right? Not iOS.
Oh, I said iOS, but I don't know the difference. Yeah, Macintosh.
Yeah, Apple has split those naming designations off. So Mac OS is specifically for the computer, and iOS is for tablets and iPhones.
Gotcha.
So it's in, I don't, and the way I understood it was that Mac OS is something that they're going to be doing. They announced that alongside something else, but they haven't said anything about tablets or computer or phones just yet.
That makes sense.
I don't know, it seems like the way to go, at least, like you said, at least on a tablet. I mean, I would, if they put it on an iPad, I'd go buy a real iPad in a heartbeat. I have an iPad mini that I've had for a long time. All I use it for really is when I travel, which is a lot, to be fair, but I put movies on it, because that way I'm not at the mercy of the movies on the airplane. And also I can start watching it right when I sit down, and it never shuts off or gets interrupted, or what I can just, put in my headset that kind of blocks everything out and watch it. But that's basically all I use that iPad for. Like everything else, I'm just on my phone. Right. Anyway, but boy, I'll tell you what, if they came out with Arena on an iPad, I would snap that off. I would go get one of those iPads and start jamming. But
hardware mover.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Great stuff, Rye. Thanks for bringing so much information and knowledge to us this week. It was really great to have you back on the show. So 2 questions. 1, where can people find you? And 2, what about the stream? Tell us about the stream.
Well, you can find me at Ryan Spain on Twitter, or come join us on the stream. We are streaming 9 a.m. to noon plus Monday through Friday Pacific at Going Optimal. That's Twitch TV/Going Optimal. And it's going great. I love my community. We have a lot of fun, and we track the results. We talk about the plays, and it's always a good time. So come hang out there.
Yeah, and we've been talking. I want to come back on there. I popped on a while ago for a little while, but I'd love to come back on and just hang out for a draft or 2 with you one of these days.
Well, let's just after we get off air here, let's find a calendar date and just put it in there. See if we can, because we keep talking about it, but if we actually put it in the calendar, it might actually happen.
Yeah, it's just hard because on every random day, it's just whatever gets lost through the cracks. But yeah, make sure you check out Ryan's stream for sure. I mentioned it before, but when I think of the streams that really go along with the philosophy of this podcast, I think of Ben Stark's stream, and I think of your stream as just really being places to learn, ways to interact with Magic in a way that is going to help you improve at it, which at least in theory will help you enjoy it more and have more results along the lines of the ones that you're hoping for. And that's a big part of why we do the show. So I love it. there's lots of different ways to improve at the game, and one of them is to watch Ryan stream. So I highly recommend doing so. And as mentioned before, lots of links in the show notes this time around, but Ryan's Twitter and stream links will be in there as well as the other ones that we mentioned throughout the show. So Ryan, thanks again for coming on, and I know we'll talk to you again soon. We'll look forward to it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. If you want to find me on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and you can find everything related to the show at lrcast.com. I want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related, as I mentioned before. Don't forget about that newsletter, channelfireball.com/newsletter, to sign up for 1, 2, or all 3 of the free newsletters from Channel Fireball. You even sometimes get some extra little deals in there. Yeah, some little, not just free content, but also some extra little deals too. So please do check that out as well. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
All right. I was thinking about stories I had that I might tell as a sign off, and I have one that's somewhat tangential to results orientation and thinking about that kind of thing that I thought it's kind of a 2-part story. All right. And part 1 involves Marshall. So you can call me on anything that I have inaccurate here. But as many of you know, I played and still play, but not as often anymore, but was heavy into poker with Marshall in the mid-aughts. We were playing a lot together. We had a poker group that played every Wednesday, if not more often than that even. And we actually played a lot at the software company, the game company I was working at the time. It's where Limited Resources was born, and where Magic Marshall reintroduced himself to Magic. But a lot of things happen when you play poker against the same people again and again and again and again. You get some in jokes, some in gags, and stories of great lore or whatever. And I had the great honor of air quotes, of having a poker hand named after me. So yep. I was in position, which is to say I was like the dealer or near the dealer button, which allows you to play a little bit wider of a range of hands. And I got into a hand against Marshall, and we were head up, just the two of us into the flop. And I had decided to play the Jack-8 of spades as though it were a really strong hand. It's not, it's not really a good hand at all. But sometimes you play the player and not the hand, and I decided I was going to use my position to try and muscle Marshall around a bit. And so I was playing it like it was a good hand, but he wasn't going away. And I was, but I kind of got in a little deep or whatever. And then I hit a jack, and then like an 8 came up or something. And we get to the river, and Marshall, being his tight, good self, is playing something like Queens or whatever, and I sheepishly turn up my winning yet kind of garbagey hand of the Jack-8 of spades, and the table kind of erupts into laughter and like, oh my God, and I'm like, I'm doing the classic, it was suited, that's the battle cry, the battle cry of the weak poker player, I had position, it was suited, shut up, I got there, results oriented, right? Look, I'm dragging the pot, okay, that's results orientation for you, right? Anyway, I was holding up the Jack-8 spades as like it was this great hand, so we decided it got named as the Spainer. So the Jack-8 suited became known as the Spainer, and Jack-8 of spades became known as the true Spainer. The true Spainer, yeah. Or just the true. If you said, it's the true, that was enough. People, and also the group decided the spelling of Spainer was lowercase spainr. Yeah. That was canon, right? I think I decided that because all of the websites at the time were doing that. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. They were, from. I think it was just a joke, But it's funny because then it put me in a spot where now, like, for the rest of my poker career with this group, I play Jack-8 suited like it's aces. Like I am honor bound to treat this hand like it's a monster. And and when I lose with it, I sheepishly muck it. And when I win with it, I show it up triumphantly, and the table laughs because I did it again with the old Spainer, right? The old Spainer, yeah. So that's part 1. Part 2. It's about 10 years ago now. My dear grandfather passes away. He's 95 at the time. Lived a long, full life, and we celebrated his wonderful life in a memorial service, and it was a memorial service / ice cream social. I get my I get my ice cream addiction, honestly. Um, my dad, of course, had that sad and difficult job of processing his dad's stuff. You know, my grandmother had already passed, so now he was in the place of needing to deal with the physical stuff that had been left behind by my grandparents. And we flew out to Columbus, where he was from, and attended the service. And my dad brought all the family to his apartment and was desperately trying to get us to take stuff, you know. But I didn't need I don't need many mementos. I don't, you know, there was some functional stuff. Like, it's funny, my wife took his automatic stamper. Like, his hand was really shaky, so he couldn't sign documents very well by the end. So he had a ka-chunk signature thing. And we kept that, and my wife turned it into a Christmas ornament. So my grandfather's signature ka-chunker is on our Christmas tree. And I couldn't decide what I wanted to take something, but I didn't know what to take. And I thought about my life with my grandparents and what my visits to them in Columbus were like. And honestly, a lot of my gaming stemmed out of my time with my grandparents on both sides of my family. But a lot of my memories about visiting Columbus involve playing Scrabble, playing hearts, playing cards, playing cribbage. I learned to play cribbage with my grandma. And since gaming is so important to me, and some of my roots of gaming were associated with my grandparents, I decided I would root through their games and whatever stuff he had left on the gaming front and see if there was something there. Well, all he had left was a bunch of decks of cards in different, you know, there's a bunch of them. Like, there's probably 12 to 25 different single and double decks of cards that
Wow.
because they just kept them over the years, and it was a whole pile of cards. And I was looking through them, and I decided I'm going to take a deck. I'm going to take a deck of cards, and that's going to be my memento for my grandfather. And I decided on a pair of decks. It was a classic bridge thing where it was a clear plastic case with the two decks in it, you know, side by side. And I was just looking at the backs of all the decks, and I said, all right, this one. I like this. This is my favorite one of the bunch. I like the pattern on the back of these decks. This is it. Dad, I'm taking this. I'm taking these decks of cards, and that's all I really want here. I'm sorry. He said, that's cool. And so I leave the apartment with it, and I casually flip it over, and the bottom cards on the decks that I took from my grandfather, were the Jack-8 of spades.
Whoa!
I flipped it up.
The true?
The true is staring at me in the face. It was the one thing I decided to keep. That's crazy. One thing I decided to keep from that whole apartment. The one deck out of dozens in the box. And I flip it over, and it's showing me my signature hand. And this is where I'm a pretty... I see coincidences as just that. You know, I can look at this and say, well, there was a 2 in 52 chance that the one card would be a Jack or 8 of spades, and then a 1 in 52 chance that the other one would be the other, right? So statistically, it's 1 in 26 times 1 in 52, and that's the chances of that happening. But the context, is, you know...
I don't know, dude. That seems, yeah.
It is the single greatest coincident moment that I've experienced. I know you all you know what I'm talking about. Everybody has like that weird Twilight Zone coincidence that they've experienced in their life. This one just blew me away, and it kind of brought me to tears. And I don't know. You tell me.
It's a true Spader. It can't be a coincidence.
How can it be a coincidence?
I can't explain it, but it can't be a coincidence. So
it was something
else.
Where I let it. Yeah. Craziest coincidence or craziest message from beyond I've ever received. You decide.
Crazy.